Good evening. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon
Dudes.
The Dungeon Dudes. It's so hard to do that. Welcome to our monthly Q&A discussion here on Twitch. This is, for those that don't know, I am Monty Martin and Kelly, and we are the Dungeon Dudes. Wow. What's wrong with feeling? Let's take that from the top. This is our monthly Q&A discussions where Kelly and I take some questions about game mastering, role-playing games, Dungeons & Dragons, and all sorts of other things from our patrons and Twitch chat, and just have a fun 2-hour workshop session where we talk about a wide range of topics from on D&D and everything beyond.
Just some housekeeping stuff. As usual, we are going to be answering the patron-submitted questions first. If you do have any questions, I would ask you to hold them until the end. If we get through a lot of the questions that we have, we might occasionally take one or two from chat if we feel like there's a good pause in the main questions. But other than that, if you have a question when we get to those, just please write question in capital letters in the chat before you ask your question so that I know what to grab and reference. Anything else besides questions? We got over 100 submissions this time.
Oh yeah, we got a lot. So we're unfortunately we're not going to be able to answer every single one of those questions in our time tonight. But Kelly and I have gone through the amazing submissions. This time we kind of did a wild card. We did a fun experiment. So actually, thank you, patrons. We actually asked folks to submit the general topic of their question for us, and the vast majority, the overwhelming majority, were on dungeon mastering topics. We did this as an experiment because we've been rotating the question topics, and so if you like that, if you like just being able to choose the smorgasbord of questions, rather than we in the previous Q&As we kind of had a theme with each one, but we kind of did a grab bag this time as well, mostly because Kelly and I have been so hard at work with the book, the big old book, but it's been a treat. So it was really cool to actually get that feedback. So appreciate all of our patrons actually organizing their questions in this way, because the vast majority were for game mastering. We did not get as many player focused questions this time around. So we got a few really good ones though. So that's where we're leaving things off.
Yeah, so we're gonna get through as many as possible. We might not answer. If you did submit a question, we apologize if we can't answer it. We tried to grab questions that were similar and pick one of them to put up top, and there were some questions that actually we've answered in one or more episodes that we've made. So we might not get around to answering those, but we're going to do our best and see what we can answer. And to the several people who submitted questions that involved either thank you for all the work you're doing or just wanted to say hi, hello, and thank you so much for your submissions. It's really heartwarming when we get messages like that. Thank you so much.
We're doing pretty good. I myself, I just got the shot yesterday, and so I'm a little I've been feeling totally fine, but definitely tired.
I'm still waiting on mine, but we're getting there. And I mean, today was 17 degrees out in Toronto, and that's the nicest day we've had in a while. So I just spent 2 hours sitting in my backyard just chilling, and that's been lovely.
Yeah, we got we got some new lighting for the backyard as well, and had that up and running. Yeah, we got like these solar powered lights that we hung up in the tree in the backyard, and it's just going to be so lovely to sit back there and barbecue.
Oh man,
yeah.
I'm coming over for a barbecue.
Yeah, might need to actually get a new grill. Actually, I think we didn't properly put it away during the winter, and I think it's had it. Yeah.
Welcome everybody to Monty and Kelly's Grill Cook-Off. Tonight we're grilling burgers.
Listen, talking about the food is one of the number one things we talk about on this channel that isn't Dungeons and
It's
Dragons.
True. It's true. You and I are definitely big fans of our foods.
Yeah.
We love using them as analogies.
Yeah.
Why don't we get started with some of these patron questions? So the first question that we are going to answer today is from Dennis. They ask, have you guys played 5e together with another DM? If so, tell us a little bit about it. If not, what kind of characters would you want to play side by side? Monty and I have played a few Adventure League games side by side, and we purposely made, well, Monty's character you'll definitely recognize, but we definitely spiced it up a bit and made a really fun kind of collaborative duo character that we bring to Adventure League games. Monty, why don't you tell them a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I guess the other flip side of the answer is we haven't otherwise played together in campaigns in like a long-term home campaign.
Yeah, we've DM'd
with another DM. Yeah, we've DM'd for each other, and we've had a couple of friends in our circle DM one-shots where we played together, and then we've played a couple games in Adventurers League at mostly, almost exclusively at conventions, actually, or special events. Yeah, right. And so for when we go to conventions, Kelly and I play Blackjack Mel as an arcane trickster rogue.
And I accompany him as Brand Surefire, a Battlemaster fighter who has Polearm Master and a glaive.
And basically our shtick is that Blackjack Mel is Brand Surefire's brand manager.
Yes, Brand Surefire is working on his brand. He was a gladiator, but now he wants to be a hero. So he's hired Blackjack Mel as his manager. And Blackjack Mel's job is to make sure that Brand Surefire looks as good as possible, saving people and defeating monsters, and just making sure that he is the all-star of heroes in the realm.
Yeah, so it's great because like, this is a great opportunity. Like, you know, we could make some money, get in, get out. You know, talk them up. I assure you, they will pay us extra this time around, and the word will totally get out about it. Your ex-boy's brand. Just make sure, you know, I got to take my cut, right?
What was your? You know, it's funny that like now when I look at Brand Surefire, I don't know if I made it. I feel like I made Brand Surefire, not intending to make him basically another Caspian knight, but he kind of
Yeah.
was. Like, he was loud and boisterous, and he wore like gold-plated armor and was just like, I can defeat any challenge you throw at me. But like, he was completely a Caspian in his heart.
Yeah, and I think we have been invited to play in a variety of other events, but I don't think like the streamed events. We did get to play the new Dune RPG a while ago on a stream.
Yeah.
So there were a few things that from time to time that'll crop up. But actually, we haven't been like, we played a lot of D&D together, but never both of us as players. Like very rarely together, both of us as players in a long-term campaign.
I think it would be a lot of fun, though. I think Monty and I could riff off of each other really well as players, and I hope we get more opportunities to do that in the future. So that's the answer to the first question. Let's move on to the next one. This one is by Cosmology. I'm going to purposely try to say the names as bad as possible. That's my excuse in case I butcher them. How do I design puzzles that aren't too easy but aren't too hard? Can you discuss this in context of, say, a certain puzzle involving 3 drinks? I have great news for you, Cosmology, is we are releasing a video next week for puzzles.
On puzzles in D&D. We're just in the studio today. We just shot it, and we tried to give our best spin on some good advice. And I think the short version of it, one of my favorite like thesis points of the episode is, in the context of discussions in puzzles and Dungeons and Dragons, you hear a lot of advice is whether the puzzle should challenge the players or whether the puzzle should challenge the characters. And as Kelly and I were kind of talking about this issue, we actually realized that in a combat encounter in D&D, you are challenged as both a player and a character. Your character has abilities that you use, but combat rewards you as a player if you play with good strategy and tactics. So why should a puzzle be any different? puzzles should challenge both the characters and the players. And I think that actually one of the coolest ways to start thinking about puzzles is look at all the advice that you know about combat encounters and substitute it for, well, what if this was a puzzle instead? Because it turns out that doing things like using the environment in unexpected ways and making sure that your puzzle has a purpose and a reason and interesting stakes, all these things that you already know how to do to make great combat encounters, well, you just take what you know in that and apply it to puzzles, and actually it starts to work. And I think for that, you kind of, it takes practice. I think that it is much more art than anything else. But check out the video next week, and I think that we've got some cool tips for you on that. Beyond that,
I will say there is advice in the chat here of using a children's puzzle book, and we actually kind of suggest not doing that. The only time that you should use a children's puzzle book is if you can figure out a reason why a children's puzzle is the lock on the secret chest or the door or something. Because otherwise, I don't know, if I'm in the middle of a dungeon and suddenly there's a crossword puzzle, why is that crossword puzzle there? It's actually the issue that Monty and I have had with a lot of the puzzles that have been broadcast as being for Dungeons and Dragons. And we hope that this video that we've made kind of says, like, unfortunately, we kind of disagree with the advice that's out there right now, and we think that puzzles need to be better integrated into the world, the story. The characters need to be able to interact with it in meaningful ways, and I think that there's a lot of important points that we touch on in the video.
Yeah, if you're taking a puzzle whole cloth from a puzzle book, I would avoid doing that, because probably what's going to happen is that's going to take players out of the world. And that's the biggest risk with a puzzle, is taking the players out of the world. You want to make sure it's grounded in the narrative and the world itself, and taking a puzzle that would appear in a puzzle book. You got to make sure that you do a lot of work to that first to avoid the problem of taking the players out of the world.
Now, there are some great puzzle books out there, and I mean, always use things for inspiration, but remember that inspiration, you kind of need to filter it through what a Dungeons & Dragons game is going to look like. So anything that you're taking inspiration from, just make sure to run it through those filters. And
Abarash Kenpachi, puzzles, they can be part of the story or they can be a bonus. You never have to frame them one way or the other. There's a lot that we have to say in the episode that I think it'll give you ideas of if a story if it's essential, then you can use a lot of other. We got some cool ideas and strategies. So check out on Thursday. That'll be dropping next Thursday.
Next question is from Dean. They ask, if I want to put some info about the lore of my world into my dungeon, how can I do that without basically making a museum?
A museum dungeon is cool. I've made museum dungeons. They're actually neat. Yeah. You can do that.
Yeah, but if you do want to broadcast lore with your dungeon, one of the important questions to ask yourself is, what was this dungeon? Most places that are in a D&D world were not built to be inhabited by monsters. And if they were, that's also an interesting question to explore. But if the dungeon that they're going into is an old church or some ancient ruins or an abandoned castle, well, what were these things before they became a dungeon? Like, what was the castle's purpose? What was the church's purpose? What gods were worshipped in the church? By having a simple statue or mural or art piece, or things that allude to a bigger world, it gives your characters an opportunity to learn about the world from the perspective of what was this building used for. A museum is one way to tell lore, but I think you can learn a lot about a place by what you find in their churches, why their castles are there, who were the people in these castles, what was the idea, what did they love? Like, I find even you can explain a world, something that I did that we didn't really catch on with, but I was designing the Pale Man chapter, and all throughout that house are paintings that include horses, pictures of horses, statues of horses, and a large barn that was used for keeping horses. nothing there anymore has to do with horses. It's now an evil lair of a wizard. But if you look around at the surroundings, there's stuff there that tells you the lore of the family that lived here. They were avid horse collectors, and they loved horses. And that's just part of the lore. So you can actually broadcast a lot by what's on the walls, what statues, what monuments, what shrines.
I think as well, you also want to ask yourself, what is the purpose of this lore? So the question are you communicating the lore through your dungeon because you think you have some cool lore and you just want to tell this story? Or is the lore actually going to be an important clue to the adventure? If the lore is going to be an important clue in the adventure, then make it that. Like, make it the objective, make it the reason why the characters are going. Make the lore and information that is buried in the dungeon the MacGuffin of the adventure. If you just want to have your lore, if you just want to showcase the cool things that happened in your world, I think that you appreciate subtlety and nuance. Suggest things descriptively in the architecture of your buildings. So you can say, this, as Kelly said, this building is decorated with horses, or this building is decorated with a dragon motif. And just allow that to sink into the descriptions of your locations, and use things like motifs and patterns as touchstones. But be careful of using the dungeon architecture to serve the purpose of exposition if you're just going to do a lore dump on your players, and a lore dump that isn't necessarily relevant, but just kind of relevant to the adventure itself, but just kind of background information. If it is just background information, let it just be the background of your dungeon. If it is essential to the story, then treat it the way that it is. Don't let it fall into this middle ground where the players can't figure out, is this lore, are we being told this lore because it's important to the story of our adventure, or are we being told this lore just because it's cool lore? As long as you know in your mind what it is supposed to be, make sure that is clear. Your objective in doing this is clear. I also always ask myself the question, as Kelly said, is what was the dungeon? Who built the dungeon? Who destroyed it? What happened to it? Why are the people occupying it now not there anymore? And often I try to do cool things like tell micro stories of things that occurred. So, for example, in one of the cool things that folks might discover in Dungeons of Drakkenheim is we have put in Easter eggs that tell the story of how a character tried to escape Drakkenheim on the day the meteor fell. And these clues are hidden across several dungeons. And hopefully, if your players are intrepid enough and explore all these things, our players didn't, they might be able to piece together, oh, this was actually the story of someone trying to escape the city. And they might find out whether or not that person escaped and where they left from and where they ended up.
It could also reveal secret passages as well.
Yeah. So sometimes I think that a game, if you want to go back in time and play BioShock is so good at communicating its background lore in a subtle fashion. And of course, you could always find like audio recordings, or I really like to have things like illusions that are left behind, or you can have unsent letters. You can have bits of writing and bits of things. And if you are a creative writer and your players love like finding little lore dumps, those things are cool. It can be a lot of work to do that, so just measure that carefully.
Stone Angel 56 asks, at what point do you decide to make a completely new creature or stat block rather than adjusting and reflavoring a stat block of a different creature? I think my answer for this is, this is actually a great question. I need to ponder that for a second. I think when I want to make a monster, usually I err on the side that I'm going to create my own stat block. But then I ask myself, what's this monster going to do? What's their purpose? and why are they different? And I'll look through the monster manuals, and there are many times that I find a monster and go, oh, that's like 90% the same. I just need to change the name of it. And if I have an idea that there's nothing that even comes close to it, then I kind of look at a new stat block. But there's a lot of monsters now to go through to determine if that's the case or not. But if you have a general idea, like you can do a lot with a troll stat block and just changing a few things around. But Monty, how do you kind of differentiate the...
I mean, my life lesson from working on the DRAKKENHEIM book is I think that the only time to do it is when you can't use a monster that's in the OGL. And so you build a new stat block so you can have something to publish. I think that like... And there's a lot of touchstones and things that you can base things on, right? Like, you know, I think and sometimes you have to make decisions and stuff like that, right? I think the generally speaking, I do hack jobs on almost all my monsters. They almost always start off as a mod of another monster, whether it is just a simple reflavor or whether it is a rebuild or adding abilities or bolting things on. So I would say most of my monsters are Frankenstein creatures, and I would say for most dungeon masters, a Frankenstein of several different pieces of different monsters, adding ad hoc where you need to do things, is probably the right amount of work. I think that the only time that you should consider making a completely bespoke stat block is if you are creating a new monster, which you will use multiple times for a major villain that you'll use time and time again, or a unique new minion, and you will use that stat block over and over again. If you are only going to use that monster or NPC for a single combat encounter, it is not worth your time to make a custom stat block for them. You should focus more on the narrative, on the presentation of that monster, of the dynamics of the combat encounter, because I think that in 5th edition D&D, we have comfortably come out the other side of this attempt to make combat like an MMORPG boss fight with like weird, complicated mechanics and stuff like that. I think we kind of walked away from that after 4th edition. And so trying to make all of your combat encounters like a Rube Goldberg is not necessarily the best approach. I mean, your mileage may vary though. Like if you have players that are interested in that, but that's a lot of work for you. And I think me personally, I think it's too much work to put on a dungeon master. When
I was running my first campaign, my players killed one of the major villains pretty early, and I felt like I needed a replacement, so I made up my own villain, and I spent like a week designing a stat block that I felt was appropriate. And by the time they actually reached this villain, I found a demon in the monster manual that I just changed the name of and was like, oh, you work. And so all that time that I spent trying to come up with a bespoke stat block that was new and fresh and exciting, really, I just had to grab something appropriate.
The disclaimer, though, is that if you find making monsters fun and you're inspired to do it and you enjoy it, then that's totally fine. But if you I think there's kind of this interesting thing that happens on the discourse of Dungeons and Dragons, where there's this weird assumption that a dungeon master is a professional game designer. And I think that a lot of the time, like whenever I hear someone say like, oh, the dungeon master can just fix this problem, I go, well, a lot of DMs are not professional game designers. A lot of DMs don't have the sense of like, there's plenty of dungeon masters who are amazing creative storytellers, but they struggle with math and game balance, but they can make a great story and an amazing world. And I think, and there's also dungeon masters that are really good storytellers, really great improvisers, and just don't have a lot of time. And I think that we unfairly raise the expectations of dungeon masters to operate as professional game designers for players when we say things like, oh, the dungeon master can always balance and fix monsters that the monster manual didn't get right, or the dungeon master can always, account for overpowered magic items and min-maxing players. That's essentially offloading a bunch of responsibility onto a dungeon master, and I'm not 100% convinced that's fair. So that's why I think as consumers of game products, we should demand good rules, and we should demand well-balanced encounter building systems, and we should demand well-written and balanced and play-tested adventures, because otherwise we're saying to dungeon masters, oh yeah, we're going to charge you money for this book, but you're still going to have to do a ton of work to make it gameable. And that feels disingenuous to me.
Fair enough. Walt asks, balance. I'm having trouble challenging my players. They took over the red brands and lost mine of Phandelver and are walking around with 6 or so guys as backup. I've been trying to add other enemies to offset them, but haven't seemed to get it right yet. Suggestions?
So I just want to start off by saying the way this question starts of I'm having trouble challenging my players is the reason why I just said what I said before, because a ton of questions that we get start with I am having trouble challenging my players, and it happens. It's not easy. So, but to the question that Walt had, what do you think, Kelly? What would you do?
Get rid of the 6 guys that are following them around. Here's the thing. If I'm running Lost Mines of Phandelver and they take over the red brands now are the town guard, but they are not well equipped and they are not able to go outside the town on adventures. One thing that you need to keep in mind, by giving your party 6 additional NPCs, you have essentially made your job a lot harder as a DM. Mm-hmm. And I also, as a newer DM than Monty, I can say that in my early days, there's this desire as a DM to say yes to the player's ideas. And it's sometimes hard to have a valid reason to say no. So I imagine in this situation, the players came up with this great idea and well, now that we own the red brands, we're bringing 6 of them on our adventures. And you as the DM probably went, okay, I have no reason to say no to that because you're in charge of the red brands, but you do have a reason to say no to that because it makes more work for you. And you can justify it any way you want, but the red brands might be like, no, sorry, we're town guard. We're not equipped to go fight dragons or go lurking in castles. We're here to protect the town, or we're here to deal with the underground hideout. Maybe there's maintenance that needs to be done. I would just find a way to make it so that the heroes, your player characters, are the ones who need to be the heroes of the story, not the red brands. So the red brands shouldn't even be main characters on these quests. It should just be the characters.
I'm also going to say the red brands are dirtbags. The red brands knocked over a sleepy little village because they're lazy and they don't want to take risks. The red brands aren't the way they're presented in Lost Mines of Phandelver. Maybe you've done something different. These are not guys that are willing to just risk their lives. And if they were, they would have not been doing what they're doing. The red brands are lazy, low-level protection enforcers who had a cushy thing set up in Phandelver where they didn't really have to risk their lives because the villagers weren't gonna fight back. So the red brands, when you tell the red brands, oh yeah, hey, you guys that were thugs that were browbeating defenseless villagers in Phandelver, come with us to an orc castle. These guys are going to be like, no way, pay me, right? So just because your players I do actually have questions about how did this shake out? Because to me, if I'm role playing the red brands, yeah, maybe you're the boss of the red brands, but these guys still have their own agency and their own free will. And most of the red brands joined the red brands because they wanted to lord themselves over a bunch of peasants, not because they wanted to shake down orcs, fight ogres, or fight trolls. So you know, like, think about who these characters are and what their motivations are. And I think that if you think about that, like are they're not, these people are bandits. They're not loyal. They're there for money and for themselves and to make a quick buck really easily. So I think maybe think about why are these NPCs just so readily following the player characters into dangerous situations? What has happened that this has occurred? In general, it's a thing to think about is, you want to be careful about having NPCs follow your players into combat. NPCs are great to help players outside of combat, but you should. I generally always look for a reason why the NPC won't help the players in battle.
Yeah, and I do think it's really important to remember that, like, all the storytelling and all the role playing, like, we love doing it, but at the end of the day, this is a game. And I actually see it in the comments here from Animal Nerds saying that, like, if the players are arguing with you about it, at the end of the day, just be like, listen, you can't take the red brands with you. It dismantles everything that I have in front of me for designing the encounters in this game, and it makes my job so much harder. And at the end of the day, we're playing a game, and like, going back to what Monty said, is just like, you need to respect the DM is doing a lot of work to get this thing ready for you. And if you're a first-time DM and you're running a pre-written adventure, having your player characters, you want to say yes to their great ideas. But at a certain point, if their great idea is something that makes your job so much harder, you just got to be honest with them. And I actually had a similar thing when I've ran Lost Mine of Phandelver 3 times now. And one of my groups took over Tresender Manor. They took over the Red Brands, and they basically started, like, I don't know, there was some way that they got a money flow happening, and they basically took over the entire town and turned the Red Brands into the mercenaries who protect the whole town now. And I let them do that, and they, like, orchestrated this whole business operation. But those characters never left Phandalin. Yeah. So that was okay for me. They always had a home base to go to, and their home base felt cool and like it was something that they built. But other than that, it didn't affect the rest of the adventure.
And I think as well, like, so someone also mentioned in chat, Rule 303 mentioned, like, these guys are cutthroats. They will turn on the player characters. Like, are your player characters sleeping and camping out with these guys? Like, is that really wise? Because they're opportunists. They'll look for an opportunity to betray them. So if you want to have these guys leave, like, they can, one of these 6 NPCs can literally say, like, what you are asking us to do is too dangerous and you aren't paying enough. If you don't pay us, like, we want an equal share of the treasure. Like, just the scenario that you can present and say is, like, we're fed up with this danger pay. Like, one of us just got killed. So next time there's loot, we each want an equal share of all the treasure. And also have them, you can also have the Red Brands also start doing things that are just not cool. Like, introduce some really unsavory morality amongst them. Like, you know, maybe they're not, you know, maybe they're willing to do something really horrible, like kick puppies or kill children, right? Like, you can make them really unsavory and unpalatable people to be around as well, because they're not necessarily good people. So there's ways of making this decision that your players made turn out to not be a very good one.
Yeah. I mean, Red Brands are cutthroats. There's no reason why in the middle of the night they don't kill one of their own to rob them, and then you wake up and you have a dead Red Brand and the rest are like, oh, it wasn't me.
Yeah,
you could actually make a lot of problems.
That would be a great thing of, like, maybe the Red Brands, the 6 Red Brands that are following them, actually get 2 of them get in an argument with each other, and the other slits the other's throat in the night and is like, yeah, he pissed me off. Watch out. What are you going to do about it? That's the way we run, right? So making them, like, not good people it might be a cool way to do that. Basically, it should come with a cost of some kind.
Yeah, if your players really, like, if we remove this from Lost Mine of Phandelver, I think the basic point is, like, try to avoid overpowering your party with NPCs because they had a bright idea, the NPCs can have personalities, and those personalities can be whatever you want, and they are capable of doing things and making their own decisions outside of what the player characters decide that they should be doing. And use that to make it more interesting.
Yeah, and when I do have NPCs with my players in combat, generally what I do is in a recent stream game, we had a mass battle situation where the players did have NPC allies, and I just said, so the Silver Order is holding off these bad guys while you focus on the main scene. So what I basically did was like, I made it a zero sum again. I basically said, okay, I'm going to just have this battle happening on the sidelines that involves the NPCs that we're just going to say is happening, but we're going to focus on the main action with the player characters.
Yeah. Night Raven asks, how should you get your players to create a character that fits the setting you're playing in? My players don't want to put in the effort to read up on the various options for the setting. What can I do to make it worth their time? Something I've done for players at my table is I will submit a document. Like, I have written a homebrew campaign where I submitted a document to my players that was about a page long and explained a bunch of stuff. And I said, if you don't want to read that, here is a point form version that you can know. And like, I'm trying to think of an example. Let's say that you're running Curse of Strahd and you want like a really classic party to like feed into the narrative of Curse of Strahd. You might give them a point form thing being like, make a character who is interested in hunting monsters and vampires. Make a character who is like kind of dark fantasy style. And like, you could give a player those two things and be like, make a dark fantasy vampire hunter character. What are you going to do? And like giving them a point form version of what you think is important for them to keep in mind when they create their characters. They don't need to read an entire lore document, because oftentimes they won't do it unless they're into that. Then that's awesome. But if you have a group that's like, I don't want to read a 2-page document on your world, then just be like, my world is high magic, and a lot of people, there's a lot of vampires in the world, so you're a high magic vampire hunter. Go ahead.
If you have a specific concept in mind for your campaign and you're imagining a certain type of player character, pitch the idea to your players during session 0 and ask them explicitly to buy into the concept. So if you want to run a campaign where the players are elves and they're exploring the Feywild and everyone is going to play an elf, you can come to your players at session 0 or sometime when you're having a coffee together or beer or chatting on Zoom or whatever, and you say, hey everyone, I have an idea for a campaign, but to make this idea work, you all need to be elves. Are you into that? And maybe they would, well, would this work? And then have a discussion and a conversation and talk about your idea and your vision for the campaign openly with your players. Start the conversation about the campaign with that so that you're not mismanaging expectations. You don't have to start a D&D campaign with the idea that your players have the carte blanche to create whatever character concept you want. Just in the same way that it's not necessarily guaranteed that your RPG group is going to play D&D. And there's many other RPGs where you already have a default set of assumptions about who your character is going to be and what's going to happen to them. Like, if we are playing Star Wars, if we're playing Star Wars or Star Trek, I'm expecting my character to be involved in driving spaceships in some way. I'm going to be on a spaceship at some point in this campaign. If I'm playing Call of Cthulhu, I'm probably, an investigator of some kind. If I am playing or if I'm playing a game like Blades in the Dark or Monster of the Week, those are RPGs that lean into a strong premise and say, well, no, you're not going to make just whatever character you want to make. You're going to follow the concept and premise of this campaign. That's an okay thing to do. That is not railroading, especially when it happens at session 0. You can say, hey, engage this. And the way that you say that is that, like, hey everyone, this is going to allow me to make a campaign where your character is a really tightly integrated part of the story, and it's going to feel really rewarding. And maybe let's talk about how you can adapt your character idea. So it's about having a conversation with your players, getting really involved with them in session 0 sometimes, and maybe asking them to revise elements of their character concept. So I can't tell from your question if your players are coming to you with characters that just haven't been integrated into the setting, or with characters that just don't fit the setting. Like, for example, you have in mind a setting where there are there just aren't Aarakocra and Tabaxi and lizard folk, and you have a party of players that want to play an Aarakocra, Tabaxi, and a lizard folk, and you're like, guys, no. So that's where you just have to have the conversation. And the way to make it rewarding and say is that this will help me as a dungeon master make your characters and your backstory a meaningful and important part of the campaign.
Whenever I go to DM a new campaign, I read the campaign thoroughly. I recently ran Out of the Abyss, and what I do is I gave all my players a questionnaire when they were creating their characters for Out of the Abyss, and the questionnaire was things like, why were you near a location that was an entrance to the Underdark? What were you doing, and what were you doing when you were captured? And why is it important that you get home? And it was simple questions like that. There was a few more, but what I did is I asked each player to answer questions in their character design that alluded to how they ended up in the situation at the beginning of the campaign. And by answering those questions, each of them made a character that was tied to the campaign world. Yeah. So next up we have Allison Bob, who asked, I'm planning a one-shot for 5 level 17 characters.
Cool.
Each chooses 1 major magic item of every category except legendary and 3 potions. They will have up to 3 short rests, but no long rests. Any tips on balancing the encounters to avoid cakewalk TPK? You're at level 17. Go all out.
Yeah, don't balance your encounters. Make the most broken, stupid encounters, and your game prep should be, I have no idea how my players are going to deal with this. Just go crazy. Around level 11 to 13, that's the point where in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, there is no such thing as a balanced combat encounter anymore. You can just present your players, and you're playing a one-shot as well. And tell your players, hey, you know what, you guys, I have just gone crazy with this. This is going to be super hard. You might all die, but we're going to figure out where it goes. Don't worry about making perfectly balanced combat encounters, especially for characters above of this level of play. It doesn't exist. It's like trying to make a hammer made out of glass.
I tried to make balanced encounters for my level 15 party, and I started off with what was considered a balanced encounter, and it was no issue. There was never an issue for them. So then I tried to do like, okay, well, this is a deadly encounter for level 17 characters. It was still a cakewalk. I'm pretty sure I could throw 5 ancient dragons at a level 17 party, and they'll figure it out.
I'm also going to tell you, I don't know how long your timeline is for this one shot. I don't know if you're playing for 6 hours or for 4 hours, or if this one shot might actually be a 2-shot. But if your players are making level 17 characters, there is no chance of them getting through 3 short rests. There's 0 chance of that happening. You are not going to get to the end of this game session. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen is your first combat encounter, nobody is going to know how their characters work. And your first combat encounter is going to be an absolute drag as your players get behind the wheel of a level 17 character and realize they don't know how any of their abilities work. So that's the first combat encounter. The second combat encounter, and then that one will probably take about an hour and a half. to get through. The second combat encounter, they might start to kind of figure things out, and then by then you'll get halfway through the third combat encounter and 4 hours will have passed and the game is over. So be realistic here. Like, manage your time very effectively, and you might want to consider the reality that they're not going to get through three short rests. It might really slog on, so be prepared to like scale and jettison stuff. You like, they might get through. Now the flip side is also possible. With level 17 characters, they could just totally blow up one of the encounters and it's just over like instantaneously. So yeah,
I think we're getting into like one-shot design now, where one thing to keep in mind with a one-shot is that oftentimes, like, I'll even take myself, for example. I've played a lot of D&D, and I have thoroughly read almost every class and subclass in the entire game multiple times. That being said, when I sit down for a one-shot, if I'm playing a new character in class that I haven't tried before at the table, like Monty always throws in the like, here's 10 ratlings you gotta fight. Why? So that we can try our stuff out. It's like, what spells do I have again? What abilities can I use? What's cool to use in combat? And no matter what, if you're playing a new character, you gotta figure that out. Level 17 characters have a lot of spells and a lot of abilities that they can try out. So you want to have those early combat encounters to give them a chance to blow through some of their abilities and stuff to see what it all feels like.
Yeah, a really good first combat encounter is just have like 6 fire giants, like 6 or 8 fire giants, and see how that goes. Like, take one monster and just 6 of them, like a challenge rating 10 monster. Yeah, I think for level 17 characters, I would do like 4 to 8 fire giants and just see how that goes. And then
5 ancient dragons.
Yeah.
And then 20 Tarrasques.
Because if your first encounter is with 5 monsters that are pretty simple, but still like a formidable physical threat, you'll be able to like see out. Well, I know the number keeps going up and down, but someone just said you can have too many dice. Discuss. There's no discussion. You can never have enough dice.
Unless you have enough dice that they topple over and kill you, in which case that was too many dice. But but that was a good way to go. Yeah, I want that on my tombstone. He was killed by what he loves most. A mountain of dice.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next question. How do you run exploration? I can do roleplay and combat, but how do you run engaging exploration? We have an entire series of videos on this, and you should check out our video series on how to run overland travel, how to run. Did we do like how to run exploration?
We did how to run overland travel, and we did exploration as well. Yeah. So we have done videos on that. I really suggest. Basically, the idea from the how to run overland travel video is think about it as a dungeon. Right. Think about it as a series of encounters, and with exploration, and an exploration encounter is usually one where the player characters are skill challenges can work really, really well here as well. Opportunities for the players to investigate something. Exploration is kind of a container for the characters are interacting with the environment in a large scale way. So it can mean a lot of different things, but definitely check out those videos because I think those will work it well.
My party is recognizable. This is actually a really interesting question from MC here. My party is recognizable. It's a Kenku, Turtle, Tabaxi, and Lizard. They keep trying to stealthily infiltrate their adversary's area. The adversary knows and recognizes them, which leads to disappointment. How do I deal with a party that makes dumb plans? I'm going to come out and say this. MC, you might be being a little harsh on your players because all players love making dumb plans, and the question isn't whether they're smart or dumb, it's whether they're fun or not. I err on the side, well, fun or potential rewarding encounters that could happen from their ideas. I love embracing crazy and wacky and zany ideas, and I honestly think that, yeah, they're a Kenku, turtle, tabaxi, and lizard, but you shouldn't hold that against them too harshly because they wanted to play the characters they wanted to play. I think that if they are trying to dig into this, like, okay, if I'm a player and I designed a Kenku and my goal is to play a stealthy infiltration character, and the rest of the party I'm playing with says, yeah, we love stealthy infiltration, and it just happens to be that it's a turtle, tabaxi, and lizard, it's disappointing for me as a player that I would be stopped at every turn because the character I designed, who was meant to be a stealthy Kenku, can't be stealthy because it's a Kenku. I hear what you're saying, that, like, yeah, of course they'd stick out like sore thumbs, but if that's the case, then I would probably make my adversary have some minions that are Kenku, turtles, tabaxi, and lizards. That way I have a reason to say yes to my players, because now they might fit in a little bit better. And I would give them a little bit more leniency. You can make it difficult, like they don't want to stick out too much. And maybe there's people looking for specifically a Kenku, turtle, tabaxi, and lizard, but then they also happen to find a group of guards that are that exact thing, and they're like, oh, we can steal their stuff and pretend to be them. And that's actually a really funny thing that I would do as a DM. It's like they walk into the base, they really want to pull off the stealth infiltration mission, and guess what? They're standing at the door is a Kenku, turtle, tabaxi, and lizard guard. First of all, everybody at the table is going to laugh, and we're going to have a great time with that. Then they're going to beat them up, steal their clothes, and they're going to get to do their infiltration mission. It might not work every single time, but allowing them to get away with their silly plans once in a while is really rewarding for the players, and that's what this is all about.
You need to, also, I would say, MC, you might need to take stock of your players and who they are as people and what they're interested in playing D&D of. If you think that they are always making dumb plans, that's because they think they're fun. They think those plans are fun. They think they're interesting. They think they're cool. And so, unfortunately, you might be at an impasse because you think that their cool ideas are dumb. And you might need to reframe your mindset here and embrace their zany antics and their creativity just a little bit. And if you think that is a bad smell, if that's something that's too hard for you to swallow, if you think that, no, these plans are dumb and I hate this, then you need to have a conversation with your players about expectations of the game, and maybe you might not need to play D&D with these people because you don't like their creativity. That sounds harsh, and I hope that's not the case. It just might be one of like adjusting expectations on both sides. And yeah, maybe you can ask your players, I just like it if you guys took this game a little bit more seriously and had a little bit more logic in thinking about things. And, you know, it might be that when you do your next campaign, you say to your players, you know what, follow that advice from before and say, you know what, actually, a party where everybody is a lizard, a turtle, a cat, and a bird, that doesn't really work for me. It's not really the campaign that I want to run. Would you guys maybe think about some other concepts that maybe might work better? Like, you can have a negotiation with each other, and maybe that's what you need to do, and just make sure that it does. But I have a sense from your question, you might need to think about, should I be like, when the next time your party comes up with something and you're like, that's a dumb plan, take stock around the table and go, wait, am I the only one at the table who thinks this is dumb? Because if you are, you might want to embrace it instead.
Next question. How do you ensure that civil power exercised through guards, legal codes, political authorities is meaningful after the party reaches a certain level without simply increasing power levels and challenge ratings? Monty, I know that you had some exciting notes on this one. Would you like to go first?
Okay, so civil power doesn't exist. Civil power only exists under the consent of all the people that are involved in the society. So it relies on like the collective like society to be built. It's a very complex thing, and I think that there's an unfortunate tendency that we have picked up from video games. Video game RPGs have guards that level with the player characters, and flat out that's BS. I don't like that. I know it's done for game balance reasons, but I really think that idea that like the civil power has high level guards and that the king is a level 20 character is just not the type of fantasy world that I like. I'm just not into that. Generally speaking, I have worlds where my fantasy worlds, yeah, there's a lot of people that are part of the military, but they're like level 3 tops, right? And the king might just have the game statistics of a noble, like who's a challenge rating 1/8 person, right? And there's a handful of like powerful people, but not a lot. And the cool thing is that with a handful of powerful people, you can still present obstacles that adventurers aren't walking over anything. And like things like dragons and giants are rare. But like if the rulers and the people managing your setting are like as powerful as the lords of hell, like there's like a weird dynamic thing. Like I feel that like the tiers of play have to be adjusted properly. And like whenever I think of like mortal kingdoms, I generally don't design my mortal kingdoms to have lots of NPCs that are higher than challenge rating 5 to maybe 8. And for me, that's the way I make my world, right?
Yeah. So here's a thought on this. When we talk about the civil power in D&D and like kings and guards and things like that, the main concern that it sounds like you would have with this is that your players are going to murder the guards and the kings and all of that. The question to ask is, what are the consequences if that happens? Rather than leveling up the king's probably level 4 or 5, but maybe the people love the king. And, you know, like, if you think about it logically, like, human beings are pretty squishy. We die pretty easily. But if I go out and murder somebody, I'm probably going to jail. There are consequences. Now, if I am super powerful and I have magical powers because I'm a D&D character, and I go in and kill the king, and then all the guards come after me and I kill all the guards, I have disrupted the entire civilization in this area. Like, people are now going to be afraid of my character. Nobody's going to want to deal with me. News is going to spread throughout the realm that I am a kingslayer and I fought off all of the guards, and I am going, like, there are going to be bounty hunters coming after me now. There are going to be other high-level people that have been hired to take care of this issue that this person just walked into a kingdom and murdered the king. And yes, this is the term murder hobos that a lot of people use, but I think that when we get worried about the civil power, and like, rather than leveling them up, if your players are dumb enough to just slaughter an entire kingdom or kill a bunch of guards, there's going to be dire consequences that ripple through the rest of your campaign. A whole paladin order might come for you.
I mean, it only takes a few people to get the ire of that to raise, because or it might even be that planar powers are behind certain things. So like, you know, I actually think it is cool for there to be a level where the player characters actually can say, no, I am a level 15 wizard. I don't care about what you have to think, Mr. Monarch or Mr. or Mrs. Monarch. I can bend reality to a will. Why do the laws why do mortal laws bind me who can control planar forces? That's a really cool idea. And also, like, it also depends on like the type of world that you want to create. Like the worlds that I have in Drakkenheim, like, we have things like the Edicts of Lumen and the laws, but like those things are actually really fragile institutions, right? And so and oftentimes the law even in real life, the law masquerades as being far more capable than it actually is. There's tons of people who slip through the cracks of legal systems. There's tons of, and at the same time, even though people slip through the cracks, there's still problems, and they still do good, they still do bad. Like, it's very complicated. And so to say, like, I think that, like, I think that the interesting thing, if you want your political authorities to be interesting at higher levels, it's not a question of, are the players bound by these things? Do they have to play by the rules? But now you're actually getting into real politic. Like, you get into this thing of, like, well, yeah, your character is powerful enough that you don't have to respect the actual law of this kingdom. But now you have to deal with the real dynamics of power. And the real dynamics of power come down to ideas of, like, who controls resources, who controls the hearts and minds, who has the power of violence, who can enforce their view of the world. And it only takes a handful of very powerful people to end up turning your campaign now into this crazy political scheme of, like, your players want to do these things. So I guess it really depends on where you, like, what you want to do with your campaign and where it wants to go. If your problem is literally just, my players are murder hobos and they're always killing the NPCs that they encounter, well, your solution is a high level group of rival adventurers that come as bounty hunters to hunt them down, right? It's you raise the ire of good people who are, now you have made yourself a villain. Yeah. So now a group of heroes are going to come after you. You don't need to have a legion of level 20 paladins that are the guards for the king. You just need one level 20, one high level paladin and their adventuring party that comes after you. Because yes, well, the world itself doesn't have an army of powerful characters. You don't need an army of powerful characters. You just need one group of heroes who are willing to do the right thing. You actually have now flipped the narrative of the D&D world around.
Yeah, if your party's not going to be the heroes, somebody else will. And now they're the villains. So the next question we have here, first time DM starting a campaign with 5 pre-existing PCs, all at level 5. The campaign is written for level 1 and up. Do you have any tips on rebalancing the combat encounters for a higher level party? Thanks. I have an answer for this, but my answer is not going to be a real answer, so I also do want to give a real answer. My non-real answer is that you're making a lot more work for yourself by doing this. By being a first-time DM. So first of all, you're a first-time DM, and you already have your work cut out for you because you're going to be learning as you go. If you're running a pre-written module, by running a pre-written module that starts at level 1 and you're introducing level 5 characters into it, it means that you have work to do now for every single combat encounter in the entire module. It means that there will not be a single combat encounter that you do not have to put in the work on. That's not really an answer to your question because it sounds like you're probably already on your way to doing this. So yeah. I will say that you might need to look for other monsters that match the style of the monster that was presented, but you might need to throw some higher challenge rating creatures into the mix and possibly double the amount of minions that they now are. The jump from level 1 to 5 is actually pretty massive.
It's huge.
Yeah, level 5 is when all the cool stuff comes online. So you're now bringing the Avengers to stop a robbery at a convenience store.
Yeah, like you're in a situation now where you're going to be replacing the orcs with ogres, right? I also think that you're also going to run into unexpected things because an adventure meant for level 1 characters is expecting certain abilities that level 1 characters don't have that level 5 characters do. So characters at level 5 are now starting to gain abilities where they can teleport, they can dispel magic, they can even raise the dead, they can throw fireballs, they can do things like fly if they need to as well. So here's my tip: if you are running an adventure, if the published adventure that you're running is a longer one, so it's one of the ones that goes from level 1 to 10, maybe skip over or condense that early part of the adventure and get to the material that is level appropriate for your players. You might also consider switching tracks entirely and running a level appropriate adventure, or if your campaign hasn't started yet, start your players at level 1. So unfortunately, there isn't an easy answer here because the situation that you're in is now one where you've created more work for yourself, and you might make a couple of mistakes and get it wrong a few times, and in some respects, starting characters at level 5 for a campaign that was meant for characters at level 1, it basically means you're rebuilding the module. You're keeping the story structure, but you're pretty much going to have to rebuild everything else, which sucks. And but it could be a fun exercise for you as a first-time dungeon master, right? It's just probably a bit more work than you were anticipating.
Yeah. Gary asks, how would you roleplay your character having a secret from the rest of the party? For instance, my character is a spy in a foreign land and the party can't know. Here's the thing about a secret that the party can't know. The only reason to have a secret that the party can't know is so that the party finds out. The point of having a secret is because the secret's going to come out. Otherwise, why do you have a secret? The most interesting story element with a secret is it being revealed. So the question is, how would you roleplay your character having a secret from the rest of the party? Well, you try to keep that secret from them, but I also want to say that like your DM should know what that secret is, and you should be prepared for it to bite you in the ass at some point in the campaign.
Yeah,
and that is going to be the most interesting thing that happens to your player. I can tell you that actually in both of the DRAKKENHEIM campaigns, all of the player characters presented secrets to Monty with the intention that they would come out at some point in the campaign. And those have been the most compelling stories to listen in on and to guess and to kind of evolve over the course of the campaign. Then if you have a secret and you haven't told anybody about it, then it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. Like if you made a secret for your character and you didn't tell the DM and you didn't tell any of the other players and it never comes out,
you didn't have a secret.
I mean, you didn't have a secret.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, I think Kelly, you nailed it. The point of having a secret is its revelation. And so you should be thinking about, you get to have fun hiding it, right? Like you still get to have the fun of hiding the secret, keeping the secret from the party, but eventually it's going to come out. And so you want to think about, the trick to role playing it well is to drop hints. It is to actually make it like is to make a little mystery and work with your dungeon master so that eventually the other players figure it out. That's how you make a secret cool, because otherwise it just never comes up.
Yeah, when we're talking about role playing having a secret, like with Sebastian and Wilhelm, rather than being like, I'm never going to say a word about my secret, I actually look for opportunities where the secret is alluded to and I react to them as if I have something to hide. Because then everybody looks at me and it's like, wait, they just said this and you just reacted this way. What does that mean? And then I'm like, don't worry about it. Like, it's not something like, it's nothing. And then you kind of gloss it over. But that's the point, is that I want people to be like, oh, there's a secret here. Is it this? And they might get it half right. They might get it fully right. They might get it totally wrong. But that's the joy of role playing a secret, is like getting everybody to start guessing and start wondering what it is you're hiding.
Yep.
Any tips to help players that are inherently risk adverse enjoy and embrace D&D? I have a player in my group that seems very stressed opening a door or chest, exploring, telling an NPC what they are doing, etc. I want them to have fun, not stress. Tough question.
You got to talk to them. You just got to say, hey, are you enjoying this? Like, you're really risk averse. Are you role playing? Is this the character that you want to role play or not? And I think then you give them the classic example of Bilbo Baggins, of the reluctant adventurer. Like, we've talked about this a lot in a few of our videos, of like, the reluctant adventurer or the lone wolf still goes on the adventure. It's about role playing the character's discovery of like how they become a hero, how they become an adventurer, how they had a great story. And so it might be worth breaking it down, like sitting down, having a coffee and working through it and like figuring out, like, are you enjoying this? Like, are you having fun doing this? Because like, it seems like you don't want to take any risks. And I think one of the things that's really important to say with Dungeons and Dragons is D&D is not a game where you can reduce your risk to zero. That's not the point of the game. The point is to take risks, because it's a game. Like, we don't take risks. You can take the risks in the game, and even if you die, it doesn't matter, because it was just your character in a game. So have that conversation with your player and just find out what they're interested in, and ask them to find out what they want. Like, a really good question is like to ask is like, what do you like about this game? What are you enjoying? Because it seems like you're always not engaging. And listen to them and find out what it is that they do like, what they do want to do. And then, introduce why this is a problem and why you think about this, and hopefully you can solve it.
Yeah, I think that nailed it. I don't have anything to add to that.
Yeah.
We'll move on to Kello Games, who asks, when building your character, do you create your backstory and traits first and then decide your class and race, or vice versa? I switch between the two, and just wondering what the both of you do when creating your characters. I also switch between them. It depends on what my running passionate idea is. For Sebastian, I knew that I wanted to play a spellcaster. I had never played a sorcerer before, so I decided that would be it. And then I developed kind of I picked that I was going to play a shadow sorcerer. And then rather than reading anything about shadow sorcerers lore or anything, I said, okay, well, I want to play this cool DRAKKENHEIMified character who's a shadow sorcerer. So what does that mean for this character? And then I started piecing together all of the lore bits that tied Sebastian together. With Wilhelm, I did the opposite. Wilhelm was at one point a cleric, a bard,
a blood hunter,
a fighter, and then eventually a rogue. I had the concept of who Wilhelm was. I had his whole backstory written. I had the entire character designed in my head, his personality, what I wanted his core attributes to be. And then I tried to find the class subclass combination that spoke to who Wilhelm was going to be. I think that it could have been really interesting to see what would have happened with the original cleric Wilhelm, but he ended up a rogue, and that ended up fitting the themes that I wanted to make.
And I think what's interesting as well is that there were elements of the character's personality that shifted as you were creating the character. Like, the cleric version of Wilhelm had some different elements to that character that I think ultimately you discarded.
Yes.
And so as the iterations, and so ultimately, and by the time Wilhelm became a swashbuckler rogue, I think that there were other elements of the character became elevated. So it's actually an oscillation, right? Like, it's like, oh, some of these class choices I'm making are pulling me in one direction, but the personality directions are also pulling me another. So you kind of figure it out, right? I actually don't think that one way or the other is superior. I think it's both. It's like, these are two muscles, a left brain, right brain thing that need to work together.
Yeah. Monty, what do you do when you're designing characters? What's your kind of general...
I usually start with a character image or a piece of artwork. Like the last character that I got to play, the Clockwork Soul Sorcerer that I played, I really didn't understand who that character was till Jeremy finished the artwork.
That was great artwork. Although somebody actually said it, the artwork looked like me as an old man. That you were playing me. Was that? I think somebody said it looks like Kelly as an old man, and I was like, cool. I'm here for that.
It was cool. It was fun. It was fun.
That artwork was brilliant, and yeah. So I don't know. I love making characters, and whatever way an idea comes to me. Recently, I was spitballing. Like I know that I want to play an eloquence bard, so I have made 5 eloquence bards who are completely different personalities, just to see which one feels the most right.
Yeah.
But that's yeah,
and I think making your character playing the character that feels right for the campaign and the party also matters a lot. So this is why I always encourage, like, when you are making a character at the start of a new campaign, try to think of multiple ideas and try not to settle your heart on any one idea right away, because sometimes it's better to have that character creation happen also in conversation with the DM and the rest of the group, because you can end up with a much more rewarding experience that way.
Troy asks, there are a ton of optional class features in Tasha's. Which ones do you think are the most impactful? And are there any you would allow players to use if you are running a campaign? I don't have the book in front of me, and it's been a hot second since I looked at all of the class features. The one that I know off the top of my head is the Rogue one, because I've been using it. I think it's great. I think it is impactful, but I also think it's a really valuable piece for rogues, and I love it.
Yeah, you know what? I don't think there's anyone that I would say no to flat out. I don't think.
I mean, Monty and I are honestly big fans of Tasha's. I think that Tasha's added a lot of really cool stuff to the game, and I'm here for it. Although I know that a lot of people said that like it kind of pushed the power level up, but Monty and I love pushing the power level regardless. So whatever, it's all fun.
No, I think the biggest ones, of course, are the Ranger ones. I think that those, like the alternate Ranger class features and the Beastmaster stuff, I think is really big. The Sorcerer stuff, I think, is really big as well. I like that there's more options for characters to swap out their spells and cantrips as well. I think all that is very healthy for the game.
Yeah. So yeah, I wouldn't remove any of them, but yeah, I think Rangers, Sorcerers, they got the best of everything in Tasha's. How would you build a frontline character without using the traditional classes? My question, I'm going to answer your question with another question. Is a Moon Druid a traditional frontline class? Because if not, I'm playing a Moon Druid. Because at low levels, a bear is a great frontline tank. Because bears will just eat damage all day.
So do we say that the traditional ones are Barbarian, Fighter, Paladin?
That would be my guess. If you are including Moon Druid, then I think a Abjuration Wizard with like,
I think a Blade Singer could hold on the front lines. I think that AC bonus from the Blade Singing ability is going to take you pretty far, but you're still on a squishy D6 hit die. Which I think that the thing about a good frontline character is that a frontline character still has to be tough enough to survive taking the direct hit on the jaw. Like we talked about this in the video, is that like, so even if you're using something like a spell to bolster your defenses, like Blur or something like that, or Mirror Image, or even the Shield spell, I think it's really important to be a good frontliner that you, underneath all that, you still have the hit points.
What if I'm a Mountain Dwarf?
Maybe, but like, you could boost that up with a good hit die and stuff like that. I think a Hexblade Warlock could still also pull off the front line. I think D8 isn't such a dire situation, and I think clerics can also pull it off as well.
Yes. I think Rangers, there's a possibility for some good Ranger builds because they have a decent hit die and they can be a melee. And I mean, if you're the new Beastmaster, you can throw your Beast into front lines and kind of double down on how many hit points and how much damage you're outputting. So I could see some Beastmaster
Yep.
options that are pretty cool. So there's some cool frontliners for you.
Yeah.
What is your favorite multi-class to play as a player character, and what are a few of your favorite options for villains as a DM? 2 questions in one.
I think my favorite multi-class is the Witch Knight, the
Mine too.
Hexblade Paladin. Yeah.
It's got to be the Hexblade Paladin. So both of us have the same. What's your favorite go-to for a villain?
So the thing that I'll always say is that I never restrict myself on building my villains in accordance with the rules for player characters. So like I freely mix and match my character abilities. So like when I was building the Queen of Thieves, right? I said, well, what if I gave full spellcasting to arcane tricksters and then gave them the abilities of arcane tricksters and enchanters and illusionists, and made and just gave everything that I wanted to have rather than having to choose. So you can, if you want to have a villain that has the class features of an arcane trickster and an enchanter wizard and an illusionist and has full spellcasting, and has sneak attack, you can do that. You're allowed to do that. And because the rules of D&D allow you as a dungeon master to just say, okay, well, if I take a character that has sneak attack and has full spellcasting and has illusionist powers and enchanter powers and arcane trickster powers and has all these abilities and has legendary actions on top of that, the rules actually tell you, well, if you did all that, here's how to calculate the challenge rating. And yeah, you end up with like a challenge rating 16 monster. But now you've got a great NPC villain. So don't worry about it's less like, don't worry about those restrictions, because at the end of the day, like building a villain in accordance to the rules of multi-classing and the rules of player characters still isn't going to tell you the challenge rating of that villain. So like you can play with the restrictions, but the restrictions don't do anything on your end aside from like the point of pride that I made a villain, because like, yeah, like the player character class levels in multi-classing don't actually tell you what the challenge rating of the creature that you created is. You still have to go in and assess that using the rules in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So because they don't have any functional purpose, don't be bound by them.
Yeah, I've never actually designed a villain using the same rules as player characters. That's just not something that I've ever done. At most, I'll take a cool monster and revamp it or reskin it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't touch that sort of thing with my villains. I try to avoid doing that with any monster, really. It's like I have enough work. I'm not making a million player characters because like they don't work the same way as monsters do. And I don't know. That's just my preference.
Yeah, but I think my favorite ability, I can say with experience, and I think that for me as villains, my favorite abilities, as always, as anyone that watched DRAKKENHEIM knows, I love villains that use scrying magic. I love villains that use illusion magic. I love villains that use mind control. I love villains that use detect thoughts. I love villains who play mind games with the player characters, because they can always do it so much better than the player character ever can.
You know, this isn't a multi-class, but when it comes to villains, you know what D&D needs more of? Bard villains.
Yes.
There's to me more evil bards out there.
Oh, Mock from Rock and Roll. I still want to do a villain that is Mock from Rock and Roll. Nothing like a bard using a musical concert to summon the devil. Like, right? That is metal. Like, that is metal. Come on.
Yeah, you could have a campaign where a metal band has successfully worshipped the devil enough to bring the devils to the plane, and there you have a great bardic villain.
A great bardic villain. And maybe you can have them inspired by your favorite your favorite drugged out English rocker.
Yeah, so there you go. There's my vote for a villain. Not even a multi-class, just make a cool bard that's summoning the devil with their music.
Yeah.
Next question here. I DM'd my first session this past weekend for my group after a few people couldn't make the normal game. I really want to DM for friends who aren't really into D&D yet. Any tips for getting new players like this immersed and invested in the game? Keep it simple. That's my best advice. If it's their first time and they're like, I'm not really sure what D&D is, make it low level and make it simple. Don't start first time adventurers at level 5 or higher. I would say level 1 or at most level 3. But actually, I find that when you have brand new players, level 1 is the perfect place to start. And a simple adventure like getting the treasure out of the goblin cave for the town sheriff because they can't is good enough. You don't need to blow the door wide open. As a matter of fact, something that I think Monty and I have talked about before, most people who say, okay, cool, I'm willing to play D&D, let's try it out, are expecting to play a pretty cliche game, and actually delivering that to them delivers their expectations. And if you do it well, if it's like, yes, you have to go find the treasure of the goblin cave who's ruled over by a bugbear, like perfect. They're going to dig into it. They're going to have fun with it, and just keep it simple and make it fun and let it be level 1 or level 2.
Lost Mine of Phandelver works because there's an evil wizard, there's bandits, there's goblins, there's a castle, there's a dragon. Like, if you go through the list of is it in Lost Mines of Phandelver? It basically has every cliche fantasy trope, like, all in there. And that is very intentional, because it is designed to be the gateway into the hobby, and it does that by using recognizable tropes but presenting it to you in a role-playing game. And so I you know, beyond that, I think that also when you have friends that aren't ready to commit to it, I think the only other strategies that I would use is use pre-made characters, invite them over for dinner or drinks, or or if you're social, like, depending on, you know, when you're doing this, if the world's open up again, or if you're doing it remotely, like, you know, create an environment that is not a high pressure situation. It's like, you can try this out. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, you know what? We'll bust out Mario Kart.
Everybody loves Mario Kart. Curtis asks, as a DM, what do you do when you realize you've made an encounter way too difficult? Alternatively, what do you do when you've balanced the encounter well based on the character's level, but the players fight suboptimally due to inexperience? Here's the thing, if the player characters are playing suboptimally, I understand that, like, it might be because they're inexperienced, but that is the difficulty of Dungeons and Dragons. And I think that if you're running a balanced encounter and they're not able to defeat it, they need to know when to run away as well. As for making encounters balanced, if you feel you've made a mistake, this is a tough one. And it's hard to pull punches without it being noticeable. But keep in mind that most monsters and most enemies want to live. And as a matter of fact, they want to live pretty hard. And at any time, they can also choose to run away. Even if they feel like they have the upper hand, but they've been stabbed 4 times, they might be like, man, I hate getting stabbed. Like, I have minions waiting back there. I'm going to flee to my little keep where I can not get stabbed and probably kill you better. And just, like, you can do things like that. It's a tough situation, but enemies want to live. And so even if they're in a situation where they could potentially win, it might still be beneficial for them to just be like, I'm out of here, guys. Like, this is you're hurting me, and I don't like being hurt. The other option is to just have, like, if you have too many minions, start having them, like, I one time ran an encounter where my minions, I was running them with, like, the amount of hit points that it suggested, and after a couple rounds I realized that these minions were not only annoying, but they were slogging the battle down. and they were also causing too much difficulty for the players. So suddenly the minions became one hit. It's like, did you hit the minion? Cool, it's dead. So that they could focus on killing the main villain. And you might need to make a call like that on the fly. And as a DM, you're learning. You are learning. Don't be afraid to shift things on the fly, because it is a learning experience. And if you do that in the middle of the game and somebody calls you out on it, be like, yeah, I'm figuring it out. This battle was too difficult. The minions are now just minionized. So we're going to roll with it. Yeah, just go with it.
Yeah. My only other add-on to that would be is, as Kelly said, if you pull your punches or fudge the dice, your players are going to know that you're doing it. You can still do it. They're just going to know that you did it. Right? So you can bail them out with NPCs. They're going to feel bailed out. But you can, depending on the circumstances of the battle. You can have the villain or their adversaries demand their surrender and offer them the opportunity to run away and take all their treasure, take all their magic items. You don't have to TPK them. Sometimes a game where the players live but had all their magic items taken away from them could be, and they might even not even be taken prisoner, like depending on who they're fighting. Like the dragon might be fighting them, say, you are defeated, but I will not kill you, so you may tell all the world of my might, but you will give me all your treasure. Otherwise I will devour you. And that's fine. So, and if you did make it way too difficult, you can always adjust the monster's hit points down. And generally, if you adjust the hit points down a little bit, the players won't notice. They will notice if you fudge the dice. Players know that you're fudging the dice. So you can still do it, but they know that you did it.
I think that, when oh wait, I've lost the question. Where am I? Anyway, yeah, I think we covered that one.
Yeah.
So the next question is also, oh, right, I do remember my point. Okay, it's about TPKs, because I think we actually had a few questions that involved this. And I want to say that one of the most interesting things I think you can do as a DM, and you have seen Monty do this in DRAKKENHEIM. Generally speaking, your player characters or your players love their characters and don't want them to die. And to me, death is actually, a total party kill is always boring. And I've said this before. I always like to write down, what if the characters lose? What would the villains want from them? Because a lot of people will exploit a losing situation so that they can gain as much as they can out of it. And the question of what happens to the party in a total party kill situation that is more interesting than just killing them. And if you have an answer to that, that's always a cool way to go. So if the party does lose, they are now in prison without any of their gear. That's a cool scenario. They have been thrown into a pit with a horrible monster for the entertainment of everybody. The Jabba the Hutt syndrome. It's like, Luke Skywalker's been defeated by throwing him in a pit. Well, guess what? That gives the party, or Luke Skywalker, an opportunity to bust out and have a really cool scene that continues the narrative, but shows that the players lost in that instance. Yeah,
like a total party kill. A total party kill sucks. It is generally something that you want to try to avoid. And like, there were several times in DRAKKENHEIM where the players lost, but I didn't kill them all. And people ask that. Like, I actually remember, there's a very notable instance where the players clearly failed, and I could have been a vindictive DM and just slit their throats while they were unconscious. But that would have been a dumb way to end that campaign. That would have been so dumb. It would have been unsatisfying, it would have been boring, and it would not have been as interesting or as cool or in as good a story as if compared to the alternative. So just be aware that like a total party kill is unsatisfying and can be. There's circumstances where a total party kill is pretty cool. and sometimes, you know, the players make a mistake and it's worth doing it because it makes sense, and you know that it makes sense. But in general, even when the players lose, it's way more interesting when the players lose and don't die and have to deal with the repercussions of having lost than just getting killed for it. There's better consequences than player death in D&D.
Yeah. I know the CR rules and the DMG break down at higher levels, so I was wondering if you had any tips for making the players feel like they're in danger without just throwing absurdly strong monsters at them like you do in Drakkenheim. Without throwing monsters at them, how do you make them feel in danger? Without throwing monsters at them.
Have an intelligent villain who knows everything about them. And a villain who feels like they are one step ahead of your players makes them feel like they are in danger.
Oh, that's a good answer, because I know that.
Yeah. Like the players, if the players are having an easy time, they should feel like it's quiet. It's too quiet. Wait, things are going too well. This is too easy. This means something is very wrong.
if you have villains that know more about the players than they thought, if you have villains that can be one step ahead of the players, if you have villains or situations that challenge what the characters love. One of the greatest campaigns that I was ever a part of was the Red Hand of Doom, and we spent the first 5 levels of Monty's modified version of that campaign getting to know all the towns in the Elser Vale, so that when the Red Hand showed up, it didn't matter that if we were high enough level to sweep through them, we were still terrified because we were losing towns. Every day that we spent trying to solve the problems, we lost things that we had grown to love. So the best thing that you can do for a high level party, it might be too late if you're already in the midst of your high level campaign, but when you're starting the campaign, find things to make the players fall in love with. And then when you get to higher levels, threaten those things.
And also, I would just say, don't be afraid to rip off the kid gloves and throw down with the heavy hitters. So I think that there are some DMs that are like, oh, I can't use power word kill on my players, or I'm not going to hit someone with disintegrate or finger of death. Like, those spells are actually not the best spells in the game for players to take, but they make players shit their pants. When you say they cast finger of death, it's actually scary to get targeted with Finger of Death as a character every time it happens. And you might know as a DM, there's no way that this spell is actually going to kill you. It's still scary as a player. So, start pulling out the big guns of spells and just... Yeah, it's amazing how easy saying I cast Finger of Death creates a pants, a pants soiling moment.
No, it's true. I could have more than enough hit points, but if I hear Finger of Death, the only thing that I think of is there's an instant kill scenario attached to this spell, and I'm now afraid. And that's scary. That's scary.
Yeah, go to our video on spell combos and start having villains that use those. Do the dumb stuff, like trap your players in a force cage and then cast Sickening Radiance or Cloud Kill in it, right? Because as a DM, you can do cool things like having groups of spellcasters that synchronize their spellcasting to get the maximal effect. Players always talk about, oh, it's really hard to use Wall of Force and Cloud Kill together. Well, as a dungeon master, you can have 2 NPC spellcasters that ready their actions to cast the spells right off after one another and just trap the players in a Wall of Force with a Cloud Kill inside it. And it's really easy to do that. And that's just 2 CR. A mage that casts 5th level spells is a challenge rating 6 monster. So you could throw 2 of those guys into any combat encounter with high level players, and Force Cage, Cloud Kill, deal with, or Wall of Force, Cloud Kill, deal with it.
We still have a few questions in here, but I also want to make sure we do get some chat questions in. We have about 20 minutes left in the stream. Do you think we should do a couple more, or what are your thoughts, Monty?
Yeah, let's start opening things up to chat as well, and we'll kind of alternate and see as things percolate there. Someone in chat mentioned, oh, but they'll just counterspell those spellcasters. Not if they're 60 feet away from the player characters when they cast it. Wall of Force has a range of 120 feet. You can be out of counterspell range when you cast Wall of Force.
And also, if your players do counterspell it, then good on your players. That's the point of having counterspell prepared.
Yeah. Or you could just have a third wizard that counterspells the counterspeller.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just posting some questions. Monty, did you want to read another one, or do you want to move into chat, or do you want to read another one from?
Some folks are asking for updates on the Kickstarter.
Well, why don't we do a little Kickstarter update while we gather some questions?
Yeah, so the DRAKKENHEIM Kickstarter, the manuscript is finished, the writing is done. So at this stage, what's going to happen is, now that Kelly and I have finished the full manuscript for Dungeons of Drakkenheim, it means that we have something to take to all the awesome people that are going to get hired to work on this book. So it's going to go through playtesting and editing and proofreading and all that development. So the hope is that we're going to have some other industry professionals that are going to be able to take a look at the book and what Kelly and I have written, because this is our first book. And so, just because we finished writing it doesn't mean it's not going to change. But we felt it was really important to have the writing done before we went into the Kickstarter. So we actually had something tangible to say, like, this book is written. It's going to be developed. I think so the Kickstarter is going to launch in June. We're starting to get some cool art previews, though. We have an amazing art director on the team. We have some amazing folks that are working with us at Ghostfire Games that are really pulling out all the stops. We got to name our pledge tiers today. Yeah. So we decided on what the pledge tiers are going to be. We can't reveal what they are yet. But all I can say is that we're really happy with the pledge tiers, because if you are someone who just wants to get the PDF and just play Drakkenheim, you'll have it. There's an option for you. And if you are somebody who wants lots of cool goodies and lots of cool accessories to augment your game in a practical way, there's options for you. And if you want some fun toys and some cool collectibles, there's options for you too. So I'm really proud of what we've worked out, because I think we kind of hit the mark for everybody, and there'll be lots of options within that, and nobody will feel like they are missing out, and there's options for people at every budget. So I think we're really, really happy with the way that this has worked out.
I will say that one of the craziest things for me on this journey is I knew that we were going to write a book, but I wasn't prepared for all the discussions on art and products. We've seen some really cool stuff that's being worked on that blows my mind. I am itching to share it with everybody. We're not allowed yet. I'm like on standby every meeting that we have. I'm like, so when can I share things? And they're being pretty strict with me. I'd love to just show you guys everything I've seen, but stuff's coming along. There's some really cool sketches. There's some really cool finished artwork that's just being touched up. And there's some cool add-ons and additional products that are being worked on for Drakkenheim that I'm really excited about.
And some fun stretch goals as well. So we ended up, so we decided on a couple stretch goals, and we still have to finalize them, and I can't say what they are yet, but there are several stretch goals that add more stuff to the book, that will make the book, many of them are things that will make the book longer, that will put more content in the book. The reason why some of them are stretch goals is because many of them involve lots of new art. And so we need to make sure that we can actually afford to get all the artwork done for all these things, that we can get all the extra cool bits and pieces that are going to come into play. And so they should be a lot of fun, and hopefully the things that have ended up being stretch goals are all things that we would love to include, but are not that are ultimately not essential to the core campaign. So they're fun optional add-ons that will add new things that you can do in Drakkenheim, but you won't feel like this should have been essential DLC.
Yeah. Trappy says, what about second book? And I like that, and I will say Monty and I have lots of ideas.
But one at a time.
There's a world of ideas, but let's get the first one done. But if this process goes well, then yeah, Monty and I will probably continue to hope to write and create content. That's the dream. So that's the goal. But yeah, we'll get the first book finished.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a bit of an update on our Kickstarter. There's still a lot of work to go. We only have a month and a bit before the Kickstarter launches. And a lot of people are throwing out requests in the chat and like ideas of things that we might include. I can't answer any of those. I can't confirm or deny anything. But keep on guessing because it's fun. But
yeah, it's fun, and the several questions just got asked about, that unfortunately we can't answer yes or no to any of those yet. But maybe. Yeah. So I actually just saw this question in chat. What was the very first character you played? I'll answer that one quickly. Actually, the very first character I played long term was a wizard named Dax O'Malley, and he was kind of Sebastian Light. But the first character I actually ever played in a D&D game was a rogue named Dorian. And the only thing I remember, he was short-lived. He was only in about 5 sessions of D&D. But the thing that I remember Dorian doing was cutting the saddle of a goblin riding a horse or something, and was like kidnapping a villager. And I cut the saddle, caught the villager, and the goblin fell and landed on some spiky rocks. And that was my first moment as a person playing D&D that I was like, did I do that? Did I do something cool? Was I that cool? And that was the moment I was like, I love this game. What about you, Monty? First character? My first character was an elf ranger named Furion. And I played that for a couple, like, basically the starter set that me and my buddy, a really good friend of mine through high school that Jesse and I had, I played an elf ranger and he played a dwarf fighter. And there was kind of the starter set where you can kind of, like, I remember we kind of treated it like it was Hero Quest. And we played that a little bit, and then I pretty much immediately settled into the role of DM and didn't have a character at that point. But then I did eventually get to play a little bit of that character in some other campaigns. But then I think the first character that I really got to like sink my teeth into and play for a couple game sessions was a character this was in 3rd edition, and who was a fighter rogue blackguard. So there was the blackguard prestige class who kind of was like actually loosely inspired by the way that I remember the character is like the kind of the desert bandit identity that Ganondorf had. So it was a very but more like the bandit went wrong. It was a really cool character because I played a blackguard in a party with a paladin, and that campaign ended where I was kind of like an anti-hero, and me and the paladin always had arguments through the entire campaign. And at the end of the campaign, I murdered the paladin.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I'm picking up a few questions. I'm going to go back. I grabbed a few from earlier in the chat. More Monster of the Week on the channel, ? I'd love to. It's probably going to be after the Kickstarter is, like, all my work for the Kickstarter is done. Then I might revisit some more Monster of the Week. I have a lot of ideas. I have so many ideas, but I just need to find the time and energy to get those going. But right now, my priority is Drakkenheim. And I don't know. I'd love to actually see Monty sit in on a game of Monster of the Week sometime. We'll see.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be fun.
Another question. My biggest problem with DMing is adjusting on the fly. How often have you had to adjust, and what is good advice to make it seamless? I think it just comes with practice. Honestly, this is one of those things that, like, no matter how much advice I give you, it's kind of like, be good at improv, but you can't just be good at improv. You need to, like, learn it over time. The more that you understand the game, the easier it is to adjust on the fly. When I was a first-time DM, I got thrown off when my players did anything that the book didn't account for. Unfortunately, that's like the best answer I can give. There's no secret sauce to being better at making it seamless. When I was a first DM, my players would be like, what happens if I decide to blow up this pillar? Does the roof collapse? And I'm flipping through my manuals being like, what happens if they blow up a pillar? Why isn't it in the rule book? How do I understand what to do? But eventually I'm just like, yeah, sure. Why not? Let's just make it happen. Here's a dice roll. Make this happen. Okay, cool. You hit it. Yeah, the roof collapses. It's going to do this much damage. Done. Let's move on. And you just go with it. And really, I mean, 5th edition has actually made it easier. If I had thought about being a DM in previous editions, it was a lot harder because you have the wonderful tool of saying, do it with advantage or disadvantage. Your players come up with a zany idea that you're like, that helps the situation somehow. You have advantage. Or something, they like do something really dumb, then it's like, you have disadvantage because you're standing on your head while fighting bad guys. That tool set is really helpful.
In your Dungeon Master screen, maybe people can't see this because it's too small, damage by level and severity, object hit points, object armor class. These are buried in the rest of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Encounter distances, right? All these things are buried in the DMG, but they're on your DM screen. Don't forget that they're there. Damage by level. This chart, damage by level and severity, like, there should be like red arrows pointing at it because it is basically the how to improv. It is the how to improv as a DM. And so I think that is a really important little table to keep in mind. I think the other thing as well is that always recognize that you like, it's about understanding like the container of the encounter and what you're going to do. So in our game last night, in Drakkenheim, the players were trying to harpoon a sea creature. And I didn't know what the players were going to do. I had no idea how they were going to draw out this sea creature into battle. And on the seat of my pants, they were like, okay, we want to go out to this ocean with this boat and try and use ourselves as bait for the sea creature. How do we make an interesting encounter? I was running by the seat of my pants and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to make this a skill challenge. I'm going to say I need to see 5 successes of some kind of skill check. I'm going to throw in a couple setbacks and other things I'm going to make sure that everybody has something to do in the encounter. So, just say, like, here's my quick tips of how to like improvise a scene. Decide on what the parameter for success is, and sometimes it can just be 5 successful skill checks. Create an interesting setback or challenge. Make sure that every player has something to do. That's your checklist, and then you can improv from there.
Yeah. Will the Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign detail what happened to the clock tower and the Modrons? Here's the trick. Modrons are not OGL.
Yeah, I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Unfortunately, because that element was connected to Modrons and elements that we can't use because they're not basically, Wizards of the Coast has restrictions on what you can and cannot use as a third-party publisher, so we can't use Modrons. So The mystery of the clock tower has been made open-ended with a few suggestions on what to do. A few suggestions on what to do, rather than anything explicit. And we felt that that was the best solution, because the clock tower functionally, we just couldn't get there with it. It's still an interesting thing, and it's still an important objective, but that kind of side mystery, there's a way to solve the mystery, and there's a few suggestions, and we kind of link it back into what we're doing with the personal quests as well, but we've left it actually something that you can decide what it is for yourself, basically. And there's actually many other things. One of the interesting things in the DRAKKENHEIM book in general that we've done is there's several elements of the original campaign that we've actually said you get to decide these things for yourself as the dungeon master. So the mystery of the clock tower is one. You get to decide what happened to the royal family. We don't tell you what happened to the Von Kessel. There's a few of the Von Kessels that we did decide what happened to them, but the rest of them, you get to decide what their fate was.
And we also have a list of suggestions, because one of the most interesting things that you can do is having a character like, well, I don't want to give any spoilers for DRAKKENHEIM, but like there was interesting things in season 1 where certain player characters had ties to the throne of DRAKKENHEIM through ties to the Von Kessel family. And that's more interesting than us telling you where the Von Kessels all are. And some of the Von Kessels became very important key pieces in our campaign. But that doesn't need to be the case in your campaign, and you could move and switch things based on what the players choose, so that the Von Kessels are interesting no matter what your players are choosing. And that's the point, is if we set them in stone and your players choose a path through our open-ended campaign that doesn't give those answers, then they missed out on a huge piece. But if we leave it open-ended and give you suggestions, you can now mix and match elements so that these are relevant no matter what way your campaign is moving.
And Andrew, you will not decide wrong. Any decision that you make will be the right decision for your campaign. But at the same time, as an example, one of the other big ones that you get to decide when you're running your own DRAKKENHEIM campaign is the true identity of the Queen of Thieves. And that is up to you to decide who that is. We give you a couple suggestions, and we also lay out how to do it if you want to use our answer to that question. But you ultimately get to decide that. And we felt that was actually having these opportunities, because the players drive the story of DRAKKENHEIM. And so it is an adventure where you have to have these hooks where you can hook the player characters' stories into the world. And so what we had to do in writing the book is we had to actually unhook Sebastian, Veo, and Paluto from that and kind of say, okay, here's where you can plug in what your characters have brought to this. And it's really important to do that. And so it does mean that the canon of the show and the canon of the book are different, but we felt as creators that making the book not have to strictly follow the show canon is going to make your game better.
As a final question, since we only have a couple minutes left, I just put this one down here. When the shackles are off, what convention is the first one you want to visit? I think for me, Gen Con was the one that I think Gen Con, because I was robbed of Gen Con, because we had our tickets to Gen Con and were about to go right when COVID hit. We had to cancel a really big, exciting trip. The whole crew, plus our significant others, were all going to go to Gen Con together, and it was going to be, I was so looking forward to it. And I felt like we just lost such a cool opportunity there. So I really want to check out Gen Con someday when I'm able to, when the world allows me to again.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really going to depend on what makes it out to the other side, right? I mean, me and my partner, her and I are trying to figure out what, if we want to be able to do any traveling. I think that's what's kind of the big thing in general. And being able to like go some places. We're thinking about doing some traveling in Canada, at least in the short term. And I mean, you know, the reality of it is I'd love to visit my parents instead. Like, just stuff like that is that's where I'm at right now. But so conventions will be super cool when they do come back. But
I haven't seen my parents in like a year and a half now.
I think the biggest convention actually that I'm looking most forward to is Monty's Basement Con, that has an exclusive invite list of Jill, Kelly, Joe, and Kyle to come over and play some Drakkenheim.
Oh man, nobody realizes how exciting it's going to be for us to get back into the basement together. Like, we're all going to have, I don't know, it's going to be a party, and all of you are invited to watch.
Yeah.
So yeah, Monty Basement Con, it's a thing now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that takes us to, it's just about to hit 8 o'clock. So unfortunately we weren't able to answer all the questions tonight. I do think that we got through a fair chunk of them. And there were some great questions. And if you liked the format that we did tonight, where people got to kind of choose what their category was and submit questions, let us know, and we can keep doing that. Everybody now wants Monty Basement Con. So if we ever start a convention, I think it's going to be called Monty's Basement. The Dungeon Dude's Basement Con.
Yeah. Basement Con. Oh yeah, that would be funny.
So yeah, I do want to say that, like, just thanks everybody for showing up. Thanks for submitting your questions. If you are enjoying this, if you aren't in our Patreon already, most of the questions we answered tonight were submitted by our patrons. You can feel free to join our Patreon. We would absolutely love it if you did. And a huge thank you to the patrons who did submit questions. Also, if you do join our Patreon, you have the exclusive Discord where you can come and hang out with us and just chat about all things D&D and join in our writers' room and our Q&As. So hang out with us.
Awesome. And of course, don't forget to hit up DRAKKENHEIM.com to sign up for our newsletter, where we got the latest updates on the Drakkenheim Kickstarter, which is coming this June. So that'll be up to bring Dungeons of Drakkenheim to life as a hardcover book. This thing is looking amazing. We are so excited. It is a real privilege to be able to be working with such talented people on this project, and can't wait to see it all brought to life. I'm so excited.
Oh man, we sent out our first newsletter recently, so if you are on the mailing list, you would have gotten a newsletter with a bit of information and some art. The first art released for our book. I also posted it on our Instagram account, so you can check out the first piece of art released for Drakkenheim there. But there's a lot coming, and I'm so excited to share it with everybody.
And I will say, you know, some people in the chat were talking about some things, and there were some very good guesses in the chat.
Yeah, there was. I noticed that there was a lot of people that were like, "Ooh, I hope they do this," and I'm just like, yeah, who knows?
You are going to be very happy.
Yeah, a lot of you are going to be very happy, and 100%. I saw somebody say Delirium nail polish. All of our products are Delirium nail polish.
Yeah,
that's not true. I'm
that one might be a bit of a disappointment, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and we will see you next time in the dungeon.